team to come to the table. As I said before, we're going to start with a discussion on, or part of the presentation that will be on the process and the law, and obviously some of the questions have been raised in the deputations that we have been raising with staff as well.
Okay. So we've got a number of topics that we're going to cover today. Brent and I are going to cover the first two topics, which is the process and law, and then Mark and Ike the second two topics around third topic around plan change detail. This is really how we've got to where we have today. We had the National Policy Statement for Urban Development in 2020. We had the Housing Enabling Act that came in 2021, and that introduced the medium density residential standards, which apply across all residential zones. And then we also had a special plan change process introduced as well, which requires notification by August 2022. So these were sort of all put in place to enable intensification, and also because there were concerns about delays that might occur during this process. So there's been quite a lot of direction from central government, and now we've had a further change in May 2022, which is requiring a decision by August 2023. I touched on the medium density residential standards before. They're applying across all residential zones, and they allow up to 3 stories, up to 3 houses and 3 stories on individual sites. There's also a number of bulk and location standards that go alongside those. We also have the MPSUD, and I've just noted there that they apply primarily to the city centre and residential walking catchments, and they're to enable as much development as possible within those areas. So the plan change steps for PC 14, the decision-making process. People will be aware that feedback was sought over April and May of this year. And we're now at step 2, where we're considering the plan change for notification. If approved today, the plan change will be notified on the 23rd of September, and then submissions close on the 6th of November. There's a period for further submissions through November and December. It's intended by early to mid 2023 that the independent hearings panel will conduct the hearings and make its recommendations to council, and then council makes its decisions. If it does disagree with the independent hearing panel's recommendations, then it is referred back to the Minister for the Environment for a decision, and that's required by August 2023. And just in the box down below there, that's just noting that the medium density residential standards come into legal effect from the date of notification, 23rd of September, except where the qualifying matters apply. So I'll hand over to Brent now for the legals.
Thank you, John. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Brent Pizzey. I'm an in-house lawyer at the City Council. I've just got 2 slides in the presentation here today, and I'm going to keep this very brief. But I don't want to downplay the importance of a basic principle I'm going to be talking about here. And that basic principle is that councils must act lawfully. It's something that's been emphasised in the staff report to council, and I'm talking about this in 2 senses. First of all, the obligation on councils to act lawfully, and secondly, the risk if the council doesn't act lawfully. It's important to remember here because there's a pretty important difference between the report coming to council here and most staff reports that come to council. Most staff reports that come to council are making a recommendation on how a statutory duty is going to be achieved and the best way to achieve that statutory duty. But there's another element to that in this report, and that's that the council has to perform that statutory duty in the first place. It's not just about, this report isn't just about how to achieve it, it's whether the council performs that duty. If the council doesn't notify a version of Plan Change 14, then the council is simply in breach of its statutory duties. That statutory duty is in two places. First of all, in the Local Government Act, the basic role of council is to give effect to the purpose of local government and to perform the duties that are set out in other legislation. That's what the Local Government Act says. The duty that's set out in the RMA here is the duty to give effect to a national policy statement and also the other specific duties that were introduced to the RMA in 2021. Specific duties about notifying the plan change that gives effect to the NPS. So that's the specific duty. If the council doesn't perform that duty, then it's in breach. The Minister for the Environment can appoint a person. Let's move on to the next slide. The Minister for the Environment can appoint a person to perform that duty on the council's behalf. That's the risk, or one of the risks. There's also a possibility of there being an appointment of commissioners under the Local Government Act, but we assess that as being less likely than simply the Minister appointing a person to do the job that the council has not done. And if the Minister does that, the council pays all the costs of that, pays all the costs of the Minister's intervention, pays all the costs of the appointee. That appointee won't be bound, depending on the terms of reference set by the Minister, that appointee won't be bound to the content of what staff have recommended to this council to notify. So, for example, that appointee, if the terms of reference give them the ability to do this, terms of reference from the Minister, they might decide to not notify any character areas. And just giving a bit of a flavour of the risk of that, on this slide we've got a headline from Stuff in May 2022, which indicates the view of the Minister when the Minister saw what the Auckland Council had notified. So if the Minister is going to appoint someone to do this role for this council, that gives an indication of where they might be coming from. In talking about the other risks involved, these are risks for our community on top of the risk of the Minister appointee stepping in. If we assume for the moment that the Minister is going to appoint someone, then the plan change is still going to happen. There's going to be increased costs for the council. There's going to be a risk of less favourable provisions being notified. There's going to be worse timing for the submission period for people who want to put in submissions in this process, because it's more likely to be happening over the Christmas period than right now. There might be tighter timeframes set for submitters to put in their submissions. At the moment, the staff recommendation is 30 working days. It might be cut down to 20 working days because of all the time taken through the Minister appointing someone to do the council's job. There might be tighter timeframes set by the Independent Hearings Panel from now to August 2023, when the Gazette notice says that the council decision must be released by. Throughout all that period, people are still entitled to lodge resource consent applications for development that would be in accordance with the MDRS, and they'll be processed by the council. Now, in terms of that's the end of my legal advice to the council. We were proposing to stop for questions.
Yeah, we're going to pause here and take questions on the process and legal part of it.
I was going to get you just to respond to the judicial review question.
Sure. So there was from one of the deputations, there was a suggestion that someone could seek judicial review of Parliament's process through which it made the amendment to the RMA. So judicial review, just as a reminder, is a process where someone applies to the High Court for the High Court to investigate the administrative decision-making process by a public body. The High Court doesn't do that to Parliament. Parliament isn't a public body that's susceptible to that review.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Just clarifying, earlier on the question was, can government override the RMA?
Yeah, so the context of that question, Councillor, was one of the deputations highlighted a part of the officer's report which was talking about the ability for council to make last-minute changes to the provisions that staff have recommended to council. So the point that was being made in the staff report, as I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, but the point that I thought was being made by the deputation was that that there hasn't been enough investigation or enough evaluation for what staff are currently proposing to council. But there's 2,500 pages of it. I think there's been quite a bit of evaluation.
Tim?
Just with the independent hearings panel, when it's up, government can give direction to that. Can you explain how that works? Because my understanding is that if a government gives direction to the independent hearing panel over certain rules, they have no choice but to follow that direction. Is that correct? Or
I don't think it's correct that the government can give a direction to the independent hearings panel over the way it makes its decisions. The legislation gave the government the ability to set sort of process rules, such as, composition of independent hearings panels, for example. But there's been no directions come from government along those lines. So the direction that government has set is a conclusion date for the process and what the process is going to be. But now it's other than that, it's a standard RMA process where you get people lodging submissions and further submissions and leading evidence and being heard by the IHP.
And who selects the makeup of the independence hearings panel?
Council staff, that's happened.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Scandra? Were you meaning the directions to the minister appointee to make the notification decision? Because Brent did mention that.
So if you were talking about, if the minister's going to appoint someone under Section 25 of the RMA to make the decision to notify the plan change, the minister determines what the terms of reference are for the appointee. So the minister could, for example, say, right, I'm appointing this person to notify what staff have recommended to council already. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that the terms of reference are that the minister appoints the person to decide what to notify and then notify.
So my understanding is that Kāinga Ora is the only state entity that has made comment on what we're doing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah,
yes.
So their comments with regards to the Kāinga Ora does not support either character areas or heritage areas as legitimate qualifying matters. Kāinga Ora is opposed to the use of character areas which reduce density below the level provided by the MDRS. So could that be a direction or a flavour of direction that could be given?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is a real danger, isn't it? In that
Yes.
sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just ask a follow-on question from that? It seems that people have forgotten that we completely rewrote our district plan after the earthquakes, again by direction and with government controls put over the strategic framework for that. So, and as a result, medium density residential zones, central city zone with high to medium densities, 50 households per hectare, 30 households per hectare. Every time we put up a submission that didn't fit within the strategic framework, because when we tried to push back as a council, the government would simply make a submission, and the government's submission trumped our submissions when they were in conflict every single time, as I recall.
Yeah, I don't know whether it was every single time, but that was a part of that process, and it's likely to be this time as well, as the councillor has indicated. But in terms of the way the council performs its statutory duty here, I would just like to again recommend that the council expresses its, if it wishes to, its displeasure with the direction that's been coming from central government. Expresses the concerns that have been raised by the deputations, but does so in a lawful way. And staff have drafted a series of proposed resolutions that were picking up on some of the ones that were coming through from councillors over the last 2 days that help express those views while still acting lawfully.
Right. There might need to be a few more words added to some of the ones that are here too. That might help us send a stronger message. I've got Melanie next.
I thought I heard it from one of the deputations, but I'm not quite clear. Have any councils actually voted not to publicly notify? And if so, what has the result been since that point?
Not our understanding. They, as far as I know, Wellington City Council have voted to notify, but they added a number of resolutions in as part of that notification process. I think Auckland have. Hamilton. So no councils have not notified it at this point.
And are there any other
to Tier 1 councils?
Yes.
Yeah, but are there any other Tier 1 councils that are yet to notify other than Christchurch? So we're the last.
Yes.
Okay. And just to clarify from what Tim was asking about, if council was to notify this today with amendments, would that mean, assuming that it goes to the independent hearings panel and people can make their submissions, they come up with their result, and then that comes to council, and assuming that we were to agree with that, that would then mean, apart from the overlying MDRS and the rules we need to fit within, but that would mean that government would actually be kind of taken out of the picture to some degree. That would be the best way to keep government, for council to have the fullest amount of control within the rules that we're being set.
Yes, and in my view, that's the best way for the council to perform its legal duty in a way that achieves what the community are seeking to achieve. Because otherwise, you've got the risk that I've described before of the minister stepping in and setting those terms of reference for the appointee.
Sorry, I've got Pauline and Yanni and Jimmy.
Thank you. So you mentioned that if we do not notify, there will be additional costs on the council. So will there also be savings? Will there be less work for staff and therefore savings?
Yeah. I don't think so, no, because the same work would have to be done. So the work's been done till now. A person would be appointed to make the decision on notification, and then more work would have to be done as that post-notification process. So possibly the person appointed would only be appointed to make that decision on notification, and then it would go through the submission process, hearing process, so same process.
And are you saying that the council would have to pay for the hearings process?
I think what Brent's saying is the government appointee, that process.
Yeah, under the RMA, if the minister appoints someone,
Yeah.
then the council pays for the costs of that.
Could be one person's 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, so it could be the costs involved in the minister going through that process together with the cost of the appointee.
Thank you.
Yanni?
Yeah, thanks. Do you just want process questions now? Or?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay,
And legal questions.
sure. So just wanted to check so if council votes no, because we don't agree with the aims of the MPS, then what's the opportunity to challenge that? Or even if we notify it but we don't agree with it, is there any other mechanism that we have to challenge the assumption that we're a tier 1 city? So if we wanted to get excluded as being a tier 1 city because we've had an earthquake and we've got a very different planning environment and housing environment than others, what's the process to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There would be, so what you're describing in terms of the council being a tier 1 city is the content of the National Policy Statement 2020. So it's the National Policy Statement that identifies the council as being a tier 1 city. Now, as a result of that, the council's got the legal obligations that I've described to you. If the MPS was to be changed so that the council is no longer identified as being a tier 1 city, then those obligations to notify PC 14 in the form it is now fall away. So there's nothing stopping the council, for example, if this was something that you wanted to do, there'd be nothing stopping the council writing to the minister again and saying, we think there should be a change to the MPS, and can you please look at that urgently?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand though what the process is to change the MPS. Is it, we don't need to go through a select committee, an act of parliament? Is it a regulation sort of, the minister can simply write a report, stroke of a pen, or is there another process by which we go through Ministry for the Environment, MB?
The last change that was made to the MPS was one that Parliament made by an amendment to the RMA. So they can do it in a very streamlined sort of process if they choose to. The normal process involves a lot more engagement and consultation than that. But it doesn't have to be a parliamentary decision. It's one for Cabinet and the Minister.
So just to clarify, is that not an onerous process?
Doesn't sound like it.
Well, it can happen quickly.
It can. Have we ever requested that, Leanne?
Sorry?
Have we ever requested to be considered as not a tier 1 city and have the NPS changed?
The law sets
I'm just
us
saying
up
we
as
can
a
change
tier
it.
Sorry?
Brent's saying there's a process that we can change it in response to Yanni's question.
The MPSUD defines us as a tier 1 city.
That's right. So the councillor is asking whether we can get a change to the MPS. Well, anyone can ask for a change to the MPS. I've got no idea how central government would respond to it.
When the draft came out, we did make submissions on the draft, but it wasn't on the basis of not being a tier 1 city. We are not a tier 1 city alone. We're a tier 1 city because of the urban environments of Selwyn and Waimakere area as well. And it is the collective urban environment of Greater Christchurch that is the tier 1 status. We're the second fastest growing area outside Auckland. And that is actually why we're a tier 1. But it wasn't something that any councillor has ever raised before. And we went through the submission in detail before it was submitted.
Probably something to add too is that when we were first identified as a tier 1 city, it was the MPSUD, and probably the concerns about intensification weren't so great, and then the Housing Enabling Act amended the RMA and concerns got more.
The Housing Enabling Act has been dumped on top of a process that we were working through, and I mean, if I sound frustrated and annoyed, it is because I am. So, Yanni, the law has been changed, and we are now being asked to consider.
I understand that. And this was something that has been raised repeatedly through this process around us not being like Wellington and Auckland and the other tier 1
Yanni,
cities.
I have said that one size does not fit all until everyone is now quoting me.
Appreciate that.
It is what it is.
Yeah,
but
I understand that.
Can you move on to questions that can be helpful to the process today?
So to get an exemption or a change to the MPS, do we write a letter to the minister, Is that the kind of format
Yes,
that we
and
would
it's up
do?
to the government whether they would make that change or not.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
And so on in Waimakariri as well.
Yes. Just the only other question I had was in terms of we're an urban growth partnership, and I know in Auckland they had an ability to work through with central government a range of planning, land use planning mechanisms. So has this been raised at our urban growth partnership with government around the pressure that it's putting on us as a city when we don't have the problems that the other cities have? And if so, what's the response been, or is that something that we can do tomorrow?
We raise this issue over and over and over with the government, but we're going to get to some of these issues when we get to the
Yeah, it might be a
detail.
question for later on, and yeah, it's certainly been raised, but maybe it can be explained later on.
Jimmy.
One question. Today we have signed the council amendment. If amendment approved today, I'm not sure all this amendment, maybe some amendment as part of the qualifying matters, whether council will bring or present it to the independent commissioner to have review for their jurisdiction.
Yeah,
Or is absolutely to be part of the new additional the qualifying matters.
so there's various resolutions that could be put forward, but if it changes the plan change today, then that still needs to go through the independent planning hearings panel process, and it will be tested through that process. So it's not the end of the matter today. It's the start of it, and it goes through a notified process, submissions, and then the independent hearings panel considers the merits.
Okay, thank you.
And was there anyone else? Yana.
Just one final question, because as I've listened to the deputations today, one of the things that strikes me is that people are actually really concerned about the impact on their individual rights. So have we done an assessment around the Bill of Rights, and if there's any basis for a legal challenge on that basis, that what's being done infringes so greatly on people's rights that it's unlawful?
Those Christchurch City Council staff haven't done that assessment, but it was an integral part of Parliament introducing the law in the first place.
Right, okay, so we will move on to the next section of the report. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Aiklambos Takanua. I am a principal advisor here in the City Planning team, and I'm joined by Mark Stevenson, the City Planning Manager, to cover off the proposal for Plan Change 14 and 13 as well. As you will have heard already this afternoon, there are limited matters which Council can influence in terms of modifying Plan Change 14. The extent of which walkable catchments are applied for the city centre, as well as all the other suburban centres as well, Council has taken a position on that, but there is ability to influence that further, subject to further evidence on that matter as well. The density and the height limits that are commensurate to the level of commercial activity and community services that each of those centres provide for as well. Council has taken an assessment to provide a intensification response that is commensurate with those services, but obviously discretion applies in terms of additional evidence which may suggest otherwise. Qualifying matters as well has been canvassed quite extensively. We can use qualifying matters to reduce intensification that is enabled, but it must meet the high threshold as directed through the Act as a qualifying matter as well. The last matter worthwhile to raise is that we can also influence when there is a resource consent trigger for intensification that we're directing as well, and also the consenting requirements and effects that council are assessing as part of that. Council is required to produce a fulsome evidence basis to justify any plan change, and plan change 14 is no different from that. We are directed to have a defensible position and run those costs and benefits analysis accordingly, and enter into a quasi-judicial process and have a proportionately well-rationed evidence basis to justify an intensification as well. Like I mentioned, for qualifying matters, there are an additional hurdle, if you will, to go through to justify any other restriction for qualifying matters. Assess the impacts on development capacity is definitely one of those, and be quite specific about the characteristics that warrant really the restriction in terms of intensification. To highlight that matter, council officers as part of this process have produced in the order of 2,500 pages of evidence to justify the qualifying matters that we are proposing as part of this, alongside all the other evidence that we have proposed as well for notification. Following the pre-notification period that council engaged on in April to May this year, we have made several modifications and changes to the proposal for plan change 14 and 13. So in the central city, we've proposed to introduce a 90-metre height limit through the central city zone instead of an unlimited response that we had previously proposed for in the pre-notification proposal. There's also changes to the matters considered for urban design assessment within some of the mixed-use zones, which you may be aware of in the Sydenham area that we're proposing as well. And to also further concentrate the 10-storey area or the 32-metre height limit in a closer area immediately adjacent to the central city commercial zones as well. For the character and heritage areas, there are 3 new character areas that have been identified. Interface areas have also been introduced, especially for some of those heritage areas, as well as a few other areas as well where there are interfaces that are of greater sensitivity to intensification. New heritage features have also been added in response to the feedback that we received as well through this process. From the residential side of things, the framework has been assessed to further refine and simplify the overall process to consider and evaluate any intensification direction as well. Consistency in terms of amenity outcomes, outlook space, out to living, so on and so forth as well, and the urban design assessments required with that as well. There's been further slight changes as well to high density intensification extent around some of those centres, responding to the commensurate response that's there, and also some of the other qualifying matters, most notably the vacuum sewer extent that we have. And we've also updated the trees protection as well to provide a more bespoke setback control for trees. In the commercial setting, we've increased some of the heights within some of those larger centres, only in the commercial setting by an additional 2 metres to 22 metres within Riccarton, Papanui and the Hornby commercial areas. The overall proposal for the residential aspect of Plan Change 14 is really to amalgamate urban residential zones under 2 zones, being medium and high density zones. There's also the introduction of what's called a future urban zone, which effectively captures the vacant greenfield sites that are still zoned as residential activity. There's also a number of precincts that we've introduced to nuance some of the zone outcomes as well, notably those for the hills sites and also within and around those centres that we mentioned, the suburban commercial centres. Subdivisions also a relevant matter to highlight as well. The vacant minimum allotment size has also been adjusted for all of those zones, remembering as well that there cannot be any minimum allotment size that is directed for any proposed or existing dwelling that exists under MDRS through under change in legislation. The height limits as well that we are proposing as part of residential setting are accordingly. So the highest is really that was targeted at 10 stories, being 32 metres, again immediately around the central city. And then for those larger commercial suburban centres, a height limit of 20 metres targeting 6 stories, and then so on and so forth down to MDRS, which is the 12-metre height limit through the direction of the Act. A number of walking catchments had been used to really direct the extent of that intensification as well, which are listed there, and they really help to inform how we provide for a commensurate response, responding to the nature and degree of all of those centres that we have there as well. The commercial proposal, as mentioned, we are proposing to introduce a 90-metre building height limit within the central city. This is really responding to the direction of the NPSUD to increase capacity to the point where there is a maximum benefit of development. Greater heights are still possible beyond 90 metres, but it really enters into a more stringent resource consenting process. We've also proposed to have a more bespoke commercial height for Victoria Street and also around the Cathedral Square, recognising they are still commercial central city zones, and limiting that to 45 metres, respecting the sensitivity of those areas. Same for New Regent Street and the Arts Centre as well. And within those largest town centres, like I said, increasing it to 22 metres in height. The suburban commercial heights are really the same as those for the heights that we are proposing for residential, the 20, 14 and 12 metres respectively as well. And also, as mentioned, there is a fairly substantial change in terms of rezoning the current area between Addington and Charleston, largely in the Sydenham area, which is currently industrially zoned, to being commercial mixed use zone. And effectively what that means is that it provides for a greater use of residential uptake and also increases the height within that as well. It's worthwhile to mention that while the height limit has been enabled to be greater throughout the central city, the actual trigger for resource consent sits at about 21 metres for the road wall height, and there's other form controls beyond that as well. So it simply isn't that, for example, someone can build a 90-metre building without any resource consent approval. And in the mixed use zone, that limit in terms of the threshold is 17 metres in terms of the building base before resource consent kicks in as well. So overall, this is an image for really the cascade and heights that would come about as we are proposing it as part of Plan Change 14. And as you can see, it really is purposefully a transition area in height with the greatest within the central city and extending outwards from that. As mentioned, there are quite a number of qualifying matters that we are proposing alongside the intensification direction that we are proposing with Plan Change 14. It does introduce a number of new and modified features as well. First and foremost is really the coastal hazards area that we've proposed, and that really seeks to incorporate some of the work that had previously been done, which we'll touch upon in a moment, and it factors in the medium and high risks accordingly. Radio corridors, which is from the Justice Precinct to protect emergency transmissions and to reduce the heights within those transmission pathways. Heritage areas have been introduced as well, newly introduced, proposed to be introduced to the district plan, partially in response to intensification direction as well. Updated airport noise contours, which we'll touch on in a moment. The vacuum sewer areas as well for Shirley, Aranui and further north as well in Preston's. 3 new residential character areas have also been introduced, as well as changes to existing character areas. Rickett and Bush interface has also been added, and the heritage area interface as well as mentioned, which also applies in terms of Victoria Street having a lesser commercial height. So in terms of the coastal hazards that have been recognised as a qualifying matter, really what we're seeking to highlight is the risk from coastal inundation, tsunami risk, and coastal erosion as well. And what the qualifying matter does is it divides this into medium and high risk areas. In both risk areas, resource consent is required for any new dwellings. A subdivision is proposed to be a non-complying activity. And any residential development high-risk area is also a non-complying activity. It's worthwhile to note that the operative rules will still be in effect upon notification, despite the direction to have MDRS, or those medium density standards, apply at notification. And so what it means is that under the Act, if there is a new qualifying matter introduced, then simply defaults to the operative district plan controls, and will have to go through the hearings process before that is enacted and all those associated controls. There are other matters as well worthwhile to highlight in the other coastal matters that we are seeking to address in a separate plan change, mainly outside of the urban area, which is set to come to council early next year. As mentioned, we're also proposing to update the restriction under the airport noise contour. So the current district plan restricts development within the 50 dBA noise contour. This has been remodelled as part of a regional council process, which is led by independent experts, and council has sought to introduce that as part of this plan change at the average noise level, I might add as well. Effectively, what this means in practice is that the proposal would be that all of the current existing district plan controls beneath the spatial extent would continue, and so the likes of MDRS or greater wouldn't apply underneath this airport noise contour. As mentioned, character areas have been reviewed and a number have been introduced as part of this process. Because this is considered to be what's known as an other qualifying matter, it sets quite a high bar to achieve in terms of being incorporated to restrict any intensification. So a review of the operative areas has been undertaken and consideration of new areas as well. As a result of that, there are two existing areas that have been removed in terms of character areas, being in Sumner Esplanade and the Clifton area as well. And three new areas have also been proposed to be introduced as well, being on Ryan Street, Bewley, Eversham, Roker, Penrith as well. For heritage areas, there are a number of new heritage areas that have been introduced to the district plan, 11 in fact, and they really seek to obviously protect those heritage features that are there and act as quite a strong measure to deter any intensification. In light of some of the feedback that we received through the pre-notification process, we have also introduced interface areas for those those heritage areas that are within a high density setting as well. And both the character areas and the heritage areas adopt an established and defensible methodology that has been tested through the previous district plan process from council. Lastly, proposed financial contributions are also included as part of this through tree canopy cover. And effectively, this seeks to recognise the cumulative effect of intensification from a climate change perspective. Now, it is effectively a incentive-based approach whereby a financial contribution is only required when 20% tree canopy cover is not retained on the site or provided as part of any intensification on said site as well. The costs are really aligned with the valuation of the parcel as well, and there's a fixed cost as well for every individual tree. There is a calculator that is proposed to be released as well as part of this to help, I guess, educate the public on how it would apply in practice for specific sites as well. And it aligns with the 20% landscaping standard for MDRS as well. It's worthwhile to highlight that the financial contributions for tree canopy cover also applies to greenfield sites that would be newly developed. And so this means that there's, for every one of those sites that is created, the 20% canopy cover is required for those new sites, but also a 15% of the roadway area must be dedicated to tree protection as well. So by proxy, it means that if said developer wanted to avoid paying financial contributions, they would have to create tree-lined streets as a result of that. So it would introduce quite a large amount of trees if said wanted to avoid paying those financial contributions as well. In terms of the next steps, we thought we'd get John to come back and cover those off. Before I do, I guess, is there any further questions on the proposal before we cover off those next steps in terms of notification from that point?
Thank you. Sorry?
Questions?
Questions on that?
Oh,
that
sorry.
part of the
No,
presentation.
my apologies. Sorry. I have another appointment and I'm trying to resolve. Sorry. Did anyone have any questions? Melanie? Phil?
Without the financial contributions proposal we've put in this notification, is any tree canopy cover actually required on private property in the MDRS? If we don't do this, is anything required?
The MDRS requires that 20% of any site is retained for landscape area. Now, that landscape area can be, and anyone has discretion over this, a grassed area, a bushed area, or canopy. So there's an incentive, you could argue, to have tree canopy protected in terms of retaining what's there on site because it would meet that 20% that is required. But in principle, there is no direction to plant trees under MDRS.
So you're saying if we didn't put through a notification with these financial contributions in there, we would potentially see clear felling within suburbs and no trees on private property?
It would be left to the discretion of the developer, yes.
Yeah. So therefore the financial contributions are one way to protect the tree canopy cover or take money from developers.
That's right. The schedule of significant trees in the district plan also provides a level of protection for those trees scheduled with a view of a plan change in the future to add more trees to that.
I'm sort of doing two things at once and I shouldn't. I do apologise. I'm just going to send one more text and then I'll focus on the meeting. Yanni.
What I'm trying to understand is, like, in our assessment, we've made it really clear. If I just quote from it, the level of enablement being considered under PC 14 is likely to provide for a population well exceeding projected long-term growth rates. Therefore, a needs-driven response is not required. Then it goes on to say, rather, options are valued to be formulated based on accessibility and achieving the most appropriate urban form. There's other sections in there that say the increased enablement for higher density is unlikely to give rise to the desired and necessary market shift to realise more compact urban form. Further, given the required price points for apartments to become feasible, it's difficult to foresee the private development market delivering substantially more affordable housing options. It then goes on to say, in terms of housing affordability, for some decades now, Christchurch City has adequately met the demand through a balance of the new greenfield developments and enabling intensification around centres. And then also goes on to say that, in summary, the market is not currently, nor in the very long term, majorly constrained to meet demand. Further, any increased enablement is unlikely to significantly improve housing affordability for entry-level homeowners and those most financially stressed. These issues are more complex and beyond the realm of a district plan. So given that's the kind of starting point of our assessment, what I'm struggling to understand is why we felt it necessary to upzone so much of the city for a demand that doesn't exist, and to address housing affordability, which doesn't exist, which was the whole purpose of the MPS, as we were told when it came down from Wellington.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in terms of the overview, you're right in terms of quoting what we've said in our reporting. I guess the point that we'd highlight is that regardless of that state of play, council is still very much obligated to intensify and provide an intensification response under the UD. Sufficiency or surplus thereof is not a consideration in terms of intensification, so we're still obligated to respond accordingly.
So why can't we have qualifying matters that address the social impact and the environmental impact to a lot greater degree than what we've put forward, given that's been the overwhelming response from the community in terms of public pre-notification?
For qualifying matters, there's an evidential threshold of what needs to be deemed a qualifying matter. Now, there's matters that are prescribed in the national policy statement of what the government anticipates qualifying matters to include. There is discretion to add qualifying matters, but where there is a high evidential threshold, which requires site-by-site analysis to demonstrate that site is inappropriate for intensification or a reduced form of intensification.
So how? So I guess
I'd just like to ask people at the back just to allow the councillors to ask questions of officials, and then we'll come to the debate, which I'm sure will be robust.
all right. So just in terms of understanding the social impact, because like our community board heard a pretty powerful submission from local people in the inner city east, from some social work students who had been looking at the impact of intensification has pretty horrific social impacts on existing communities. And I'm just trying to understand how we can address that through what's being proposed, because it doesn't seem anything, if affordability is the kind of main issue and urban form is the second issue, there doesn't seem to be any consideration given to protecting the ability for people to afford low-cost housing. In fact, you know, what we heard through our community board was intensification is driving up house prices for the poorest people in our city, who then struggle to get secure, tenure, and affordable rentals. But this plan seems to enable that to happen at an even greater level than what we've already got.
So for the purpose of the evaluation that accompanies the plan change, Council has a responsibility under Section 32 of the Resource Management Act to evaluate the impacts of what it is proposing in the plan change. That includes environmental, economic, social and cultural effects, and has carried out that evaluation. There is an opportunity through the process and to present evidence to the hearings panel appointed to expand on that and provide further analysis of the impacts, social impacts, including of the proposed plan change. I would add that there's a number of methods to provide for more affordable housing. Supply and providing additional capacity through the district plan is one of those methods, but a number of the methods sit outside the district plan, and council is limited in terms of what it can achieve for the district plan in that context.
Right. And can I just ask, because tomorrow we've got a report going to the Greater Christchurch Urban Partnership. There's an affordable and social housing innovating plan that makes some references to land use planning around things like inclusionary zoning, which is something that's also been raised in 2007. Is that through our urban development, is something like inclusionary zoning, or requiring, if we enable the development to intensify, is there any ability to require the profits that are made from that at the expense of the community and affordable housing to go back into addressing some of the issues, whether it's through acquisition of greater degree of land to compensate for green space, or for building actually affordable housing?
There are different methods, including practice overseas of requiring a proportion of housing in a development to be affordable, but there are some legal risks around any method of that kind, which are relatively new to the New Zealand context, and there is further work required, including legal consideration of what we can lawfully do in that context. We would need to, there is a plan to address social and affordable housing, as you've identified, through the Greater Christchurch Partnership, and it's through that work that we would investigate use of inclusionary zoning for the district plan.
Right, but there's nothing that would stop us from putting a percent, say 25% of the value of the development back into a fund to either supply affordable housing or long-term rental, or...
I think that Mark's point is it remains to be seen. However, in terms of the context of Plan Change 14, something like inclusionary zoning isn't part of the proposal, and I'd probably argue it's out of scope. So council has the right and the ability to do it as a separate plan change later date, but it's not considered as part of the scope.
Okay.
Yep. Sarah? Oh, Phil, sorry. Yes, no, you were. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Could you just explain to me a bit more about the financial contributions on the tree canopy? Because did I hear you say if it was a Greensfield subdivision, 20%, I assume, has got to be put aside? Say you've got 10 hectares, you've got to put 20% aside for trees going forward when it's chopped up?
For greenfield sites, how it works is every site, you're right, has to be 20% tree canopy cover. On the road reserve, it's 15% additional to that. So in a greenfield scenario, there would have to be a contribution of trees on each site as well as the road.
So say for argument's sake, we had some figures here the other day, but they're not in here now. The $64,000. Is that?
Yes, it is.
So that's per section.
It depends on the size of the section and the valuation, but on average, we would anticipate that a typical site may be charged anywhere between $30,000 to $60,000 if they didn't provide said trees per site.
Okay, thank you.
Sarah.
Thanks. Just following on from that. So the current district plan doesn't provide for financial contributions, and does it have any minimum tree cover, tree canopy in new subdivisions?
No. So financial contributions are not in the current district plan. They were used in the previous plan before that. And in answer to your second question, there's no requirement for tree canopy cover in the operative district plan.
Yeah. So if we weren't to approve the plan change today, and what people are asking for, then the default would apply and property developers wouldn't have to provide the additional either financial contributions or trees.
So if council didn't include in its plan change financial contributions, if MDRS were to apply as prescribed by the government, then a developer could provide tree canopy cover to meet the 20% minimum landscaping requirement, but that's not...
But they wouldn't have to.
No, that's right. And
they could just grass it and not provide any trees.
And the operative district plan wouldn't otherwise require any.
Thanks. And I'm interested in the airport contours. So currently the airport contours are under review. And so my understanding is that what's provided for here is a bit of a buffer around sort of the current and the potential proposed ones. Is that right?
It's what's in the maps for this proposed plan change is an extension of the proposed 50 dBA airport noise contour line. So it's an extension of the operative contour that would apply such that the density of development allowed within the revised contour would be at a suburban scale akin to the operative district plan. Through the process of this plan change, leading up to hearings in March and April next year and before the decision in August next year by council, it's anticipated that we will have seen the results of the independent peer review that's in progress at the moment of where the revised contours should be. And through this process, we can present evidence and seek to update the extent of the contour line to reflect the most up-to-date information. What's shown on the planning maps for the purpose of notification is what is known from the remodelling of the contour lines to date by the airport, but there could well be changes to that extent as the independent peer review is completed. And so it's an extension of the operative contour as opposed to a buffer beyond.
Okay, but we're limiting any additional development within that area at the moment in case the contours change, and so to avoid reverse sensitivity and those kind of effects.
Yeah, it's to minimise the risk that over the course of with the MDRS taking effect from notification, except where a qualifying matter applies, if medium or high density development were to occur within the area of the revised contour line, there could be reverse sensitivity effects, which we can mitigate by managing that risk now.
And is that area all currently developed, or is it some of it due for development or planned development?
I mean, there's a redevelopment potential through that area with a number of sites having a single house or potential for additional houses to go on any site.
Okay, thanks. And lastly, when it comes to the affordability piece that Councillor Johansson was talking about before, I know our definitions of affordability have changed probably quite substantially over the last decade. And what are we basing that on? I mean, the median house price in Christchurch at the moment is sort of about $700,000, which is by no means affordable for a first home buyer. It might seem okay to someone who already owns a house, but what are we measuring that on? If we're saying that there's no sort of affordability issues in the near future.
It's not the purpose of this plan change to define affordability.
No.
The purpose on the NPSUD is to assist in making affordable housing. It's not part of the plan change.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Can you just give us the numbers? So all of the capacity assessments we've done for the spatial planning work that we've done with Waimakariri and so on, the capacity that the NPSUD would have allowed, what the current capacity is, what the NPSUD capacity would have been if we'd just stopped there, and then this overlay of the enabling housing legislation. So, because we've heard numbers talked about today, and I know, and I've been looking to see if I could find them in all of the submissions that I've given and all the letters that I've written, but I just can't find the exact numbers. But it's, at the moment we have a significant capacity for housing. I'm going to guess that it's in the 40,000 region, going up to 80,000, going up to substantially over that. But
under the current settings, that's about right. In terms of demand, these at 38,000
for the next is demand for Christchurch City for the next 30 years.
So that's what the demand is for the next 30 years.
Additional houses.
We don't have the figures just for the NPSUD because this is a full package with MDRS as well. But we have done the evaluation of what would be enabled through the district plan through the full package of MDRS and the NPSUD. And from a theoretical perspective, it's in excess of 800,000 dwellings that would be enabled theoretically under the district plan.
Yep.
We've also applied our feasibility, the economics of the developing said theoretical capacity, and the estimates are that after 30 years, so after 38,000 of growth it's been associated, there would still be over 100,000 dwellings that would be feasible to develop. So sufficiency isn't an issue for Christchurch at the moment, and it will not be an issue past this point.
thank you.
That's just for Christchurch.
Just for Christchurch. Yes. So Waimakariri and Selwyn have done their own analysis as part of the spatial planning process. They've both got district plans out at the moment. Jake and then Pauline.
Turning again to financial contributions, which are obviously cash or land available to us to mitigate the effects of intensification, and we've done so with tree canopy cover. And I'm talking particularly about one of my amendments, and I see the advice, and I also understand we wouldn't want to use financial contributions to interfere with the intent of NPSUD. But what's the threshold for when it's mitigation versus interfering with the intent? We've done it for tree canopy. Why could we not do it for something like daylight? Particularly given our lower being so much lower than Auckland.
Anything that we are proposing to introduce as a financial contribution and have a potential cost by needs to be associated to an effect that comes as a result of what is there. The likes of sunlight is, I guess, more or less a given through the MDRS in terms of the direction that's there through legislation. So in effect, that is a standard that's set within the Resource Management Act now, and so there isn't anything that's over and above that would be anticipated within the environment because it's set as it really is a national standard.
So MDRS, just expanding on that, prescribes a recession plan to maintain a level of sunlight to a property. as prescribed again in the Resource Management Act. We cannot propose anything more restrictive than that, except where a qualifying matter applies. To require financial contributions for development that complies with MDRS would be over and above what the law enables us to do.
Pauline?
Yeah, bit of a dumb question, but financial contributions, they are a qualifying matter.
No,
They exist now.
no. Sorry to be blunt. The financial contributions aren't in the district plan at the moment. Effectively, how it works is that a qualifying matter would restrict the level of intensification that's there. The financial contribution that we are proposing is for tree canopy cover only. People can choose to plant trees or retain trees that are there. If they don't do that, then there is a financial contribution.
Okay, so you're just
cost.
looking at applying the financial contribution that
Correct.
we already have. So, and also, thank you for clarifying that. The qualifying matters don't necessarily have to be accepted by the hearings panel.
That's right. They have the delegation to make the recommendation to council. I guess, put simply, what officers are doing is putting a recommendation to best give effect to the NPSUD and MDRS and the standards and tests for qualifying matters.
Yeah.
And it's up to the independent hearings panel to consider that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, do you have any gut feeling of whether they would be or not?
It remains to be seen.
So, no comment. Yeah, thank you.
Just want to clarify some dates here. So, from what I've kind of recall is that we got no prior notification of the Resource Management Enabling Housing Supply Bill other than a short notice alert on the 19th of October, with it being introduced that afternoon. Is that?
That's correct.
And we had been working very hard on the MPSUD so that we could meet the requirements of that, and that this was a sudden and unexpected addition to turn around in a relatively short space of time.
Correct. It vastly increased the scope of the plan change.
Absolutely. And so, we've heard from you the enablement of housing, which was what both parties said when they held hands and talked to each other without talking to us. But they basically said that that was enabling housing supply. That was their driver. But it's not an issue here. Okay. All right. Celeste?
Just a very quick question. In terms of if the plan is notified in the coastal hazard zone, would the financial contributions apply, given that it's a qualifying area?
No. So the financial contributions is only for trees, and any rules that are associated with proposed qualifying matters or proposed financial contributions don't take effect until the recommended decision is released, subject to them going through the process and succeeding. So they won't apply for notification, is the point.
Right. Look, I've got a number of amendments here, and I just wonder whether we run through them. Council staff have worked quite hard on them, and it is an extremely complex and difficult process, so I'm actually not anticipating that we'll get through it this evening. But I will adjourn the meeting till next Tuesday if I will be required to do that for the balance of the meeting anyway. We had a number of amendments, and they've been circulated to you. And if I could just run through, because what I want to know from councillors is whether you want to put up the amendment that you proposed, or whether you are happy to or agreeable to support the staff rewording of a resolution in order to have that supported as part of the approach. And if I could just go through, and it's just a yes or no, because I don't want to. I want to be able to get a very simple format for staff to put the amendments into the resolution. So
If I may, before we
Yes.
before we get underway, one element to highlight is that there is a staff requested amendment in terms of changing some of the recommendations as well regarding the interface area with Riccarton Bush.
Yes.
And so just worthwhile to highlight that staff request to amend the identification of properties that are subject to Riccarton Bush interface qualifying matter to include all of those properties that staff considered that were inadvertently left off.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely fine. So just throw that one in. So can we just quickly run through these? Melanie, you had the 20 to 25% tree cover canopy. Staff have supported an alternative resolution. What's your preference for us to consider as a council?
Well, for number one, I'm going to put that. And for number two, I'll support the staff alternative.
Councillor Cotter.
Chancellor Street one. And
Sorry, this is the Chancellor Street one.
Yeah, the heritage.
They've supported an alternative resolution.
yeah, and then
Are you comfortable with the alternative?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and I think Woodville Street has been accepted, so I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, we can't hear anything back here. We cannot hear what you're saying.
Sorry.
Not you, the whole, everybody speaking, including these three staff, are very hard to hear. Turned it up as much as possible. I've turned it up, so.
Yeah, we've got a hearing loop.
I've turned the volume up to see if that helps.
Yeah. I think the staff are turning the volume up as much as they can. Yeah, there are seats further forward which might be helpful. Councillor McClellan.
Yes to Chester Street, and like Melanie, I'll put my version, but happy to support the staff one if it comes to it. Yes to the west of Durham Street, and there I've glossed over one. The independent report, I actually think it's probably not an amendment, it's actually an alternative resolution because it would have the effect of
Sorry,
not
which one?
15.
Oh, we're just going.
Oh, no,
Okay.
can we just go through them in
Okay,
order?
sure.
Sorry.
Yes, then.
Melanie, number 6. This is subject to a previous council resolution.
Well, I would like to put it. Am I allowed?
Process.
Yeah. We'll come back on that. Councillor Johansson, number 7.
Yeah, the only really question I had on this one was it wasn't the whole of the area, but it was the areas that had continuous or close in age and character dwellings. So there was a map that you gave, and it had some quite consistent thing. I don't think it would be the whole of Woodham Road. So I was quite keen to put something there to give it protection. The only other thing I wanted to check was just how much assessment Auckland have done on their character areas. Have they gone through each individual house as well? Or have they just identified streets or areas?
Just the distinction between character and heritage areas.
Yeah.
It's quite different in terms of legislative requirements. I'm unsure in terms of the level of detail that Auckland have gone to for character areas, but they have applied 2 tiers, and as mentioned previously, came under quite a lot of criticism from the minister.
Yeah.
So I think staff have understood that you wanted all of Woodham Road, Yanni, so that should have been really clarified before. So what is it that you are actually wanting to support by way of an amendment?
With the map that staff gave, there's a stretch where it does have a consistency of character.
Yeah.
I wonder if Councillor Johansson would support the staff recommendation if it was worded to extend the existing heritage area, because then that would look at the whole area, but it would focus on probably just the area that you were referring to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concern is that if we don't notify something, then we lose the protection. In the meantime, we end up with it being destroyed.
Yeah, Woodham Road is a road of two sides, though. I think that was the understanding that we had, and I understood from staff that we couldn't protect one side over another side, that they both had to fall within the definition of heritage area, but I may be wrong.
No, that's right.
Well, that's why I was kind of interested in what we heard from some of the submitters around the difference that other councils have adopted. Like Hamilton has taken a more, I don't know what you want to call it, permissive or conservative or more of a deliberate approach. And so I was just kind of curious, but we can come back to it. I mean, I don't think we're not going to get through all these today, are we?
No.
Just on that, if I can flag that a deferral of the decision to next week would affect the notification date. Unfortunately, the letters that are proposed to go to every household in the city need to be finalised tomorrow if we're to achieve notification by the 23rd. So I just want to make you aware of that, accepting that it may require more time.
So can I just add to that the officers will do everything they can to stick with the time frame that we've got. We will be under pressure, as Mark said. We will do our very best to still stick with that notification date, but there is a risk that we may lose a few days.
In terms of Councillor Johansson's resolution, can I recommend, instead of stating consisting of all properties with a Woodham Road address, that we amend that to all properties with a consistent age on Woodham Road?
So which one of the resolutions? The second one or the council, the staff supported alternative resolution, is that right?
No, he wants the first one.
The first one, but you're changing the wording.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, if somebody can get the right wording into that, and then number 8, that the heritage list be amended to include all items that people requested to be added during the pre-notification engagement. I think staff advises that owners and occupiers haven't been consulted. The alternative resolution is to further investigate adding to the schedule all items that people ask, and if supported by staff, lodge a submission seeking those additions.
A number of councils have raised a number of those individual ones as well. I think probably the Princess Margaret's the one that's not picked up anywhere that I can see. So I'm happy to, leave all the others, but Princess Margaret I do want added.
The owners haven't been consulted.
But they don't support it. I think that's what we heard.
There are some sites where there's been no consultation with the owner, and we would recommend that there is before identification in the plan change.
Cool. I mean, I happy to debate it, but basically, as soon as you give notice, I think you run the risk of losing it, rather than enabling the time to go through the process. It's just a different, philosophy about how to protect things that people have raised if they're important to enable the assessment.
Right. The qualifying matters one, staff have accepted that. on the Clarendon Terrace flooding, the further investigation around industrial activity. Jake, the area and residential zone west of Durham.
Yeah, maintaining that one.
And not the staff one.
No. I actually, yeah, go with it as well, but
Right.
not instead of.
Okay. Councillor Templeton's, that one's fine. Councillor Johansson. That's a request to defer notification until a social impact assessment is complete. But I mean that's a voting against notification.
Sarah's amendment, is there a time frame on that? How long would that take, that piece of work? Would it be done in time for the hearing?
A social impact assessment?
Yes.
Yes, certainly. With hearings scheduled for March and April, we could commission one after notification, but in time for presenting to the hearings panel.
Yep, that's good, thank you.
Can I just clarify as well? Just because it's a very long sentence. So that does, because it says to bring that to council as well. So yes, it's for the hearings process, but D is that it comes to council as well, so we can consider other actions. So stuff outside the district plan that might include property purchase, street trees, all of those kind of things that help with the mitigation. And that's what happens with the environmental one too. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's right.
And note E there too below it, that's sort of following on.
Yeah, that's the environmental bit. Yeah, no, that's great. And so those ones, would they take a bit longer with recommendations, or would there be sort of similar time frame so that we can incorporate anything into the long-term plan by way of funding for those mitigations?
We'll ensure that it happens to inform the long-term plan.
Could we just add a little bit that after E, that just is in time to inform the draft long-term plan or something like that? That would be great. Thank you.
Right, and Councillor Johansson's that noting there is sufficient land capacity and zoning to meet the short, medium term housing.
Yeah, and I just had a slight additional wording because I've just found actually in the gazetted notice, we can actually just write to the minister. So any one of the specified territorial authorities named in this direction may, in accordance with section 80M of the RMA, apply in writing to the Minister for the Environment for an amendment to the direction as it applies to the specified territorial authority. So I think there is a way that we can get through this. And I think, just adding at the end to that amendment would be a good, just to pick up on that process.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
So council's Christchurch City is identified as a Tier 1 authority in the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. The predecessor to that, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity, defined the equivalent to a Tier 1 council was described as a high growth urban area. And whilst Tier 1 is not defined, high growth urban area was defined in the previous NPS and constitutes any urban area of a population over 30,000 people. And I think given there is demand, high in the context of other regions, that it would be challenging. It would suggest to present an argument that we're not a high growth urban area or a Tier 1 council. I just want to give you staff's advice on that because the ministry it's not without evidence that you'd need to demonstrate that we're not a high Tier 1 council.
Yeah.
Population over 30,000.
And frankly, if we want other things from the government because we're
We've
growing,
got sufficient capacity.
MRT.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, can we seek an important clarification? I've just spoken to our lawyers.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Can you consider suspending standing orders because the matter's being raised earlier?
Excuse
that we have
me.
not written to the
Excuse me. Excuse me. There are appropriate processes.
They're not being followed, though, Madam Mayor. Your
Excuse
staff are
me.
not doing their
Excuse me. Can I just? I'm just going to take a short adjournment and discuss the approach going forward. Thank you.